Okay, thank you. Hello and welcome to my session about accessibility in React applications. Yes, as I was already introduced, I studied musicology and Japanese studies while I was working at the casino as a poker dealer. And after that, in 2020, I started to learn how to code and got into accessibility. And now I'm working as an accessibility specialist in Vienna in Austria. And I'm also a Google developer expert since last autumn. And you can also follow my content about accessibilities in various areas like testing, design, development, research, and much more on my blog Accessibility First, which is available in English, German, and Japanese. So what I'm going to talk about today, let's first talk about the current situations and concerns about accessibility in single-page applications. Then let's walk over some common issues which happen in React and also how to overcome them. And lastly, I will show you some tools which will support you to make your components more accessible. So a lot of skepticism comes from the fact that some critical features of a website work fundamentally different in a single-page application. For example, in SPAs, you create components, and the component might be a part of another component and of another component until it finally ends up in a div wrapper in your index HTML. And if you look at the final document of your SPA, the page doesn't look like a coherent identity, but more like a dump of different components that happen to form a page visually. And as already mentioned, HTML is a cornerstone of any accessible website, and the page structure as well. So like a sound heading outline using landmarks. It's important how the DOM is structured and how this is converted into accessibility tree. And of course, semantic HTML in general plays an important role. And therefore, React has developed kind of a stigma within the accessibility community that web applications created in React are not very accessible. And lots of accessibility advocates also say or think that accessibility is a very big issue or a very big challenge when it comes to React applications, and that it's most likely to be impossible to achieve accessibility. Other issues include like there's one generic page title that cannot be changed, and because without page refreshes, the screen reader user may not be informed about the page change. Also, focus management is a big issue. It's mostly impossible to navigate only with keyboard, like the focus is lost visually. This is a problem for sighted keyboard users, also for switch and voice dictation users. They can't see the focus point and where they are on a page. Sometimes when you put a component inside a component inside a component, we need a div as a wrapper, and this can break semantics. So there many developers maybe don't know about the hierarchy of this parent element can only contain a specific child element. And when you put the div inside as a wrapper, then this could break the semantics when it's rendered in the DOM. And another problem is that components are updating and never the whole page. So the information can get lost, that some component somewhere on the page just updated. And yeah, the list goes on, and although these are all very valid concerns from an accessibility perspective, these are actually challenges which can be overcome with the library itself. And the best way to remedy all of the above stigmas and concerns is to create awareness about that React can in fact be an accessible library. And there is also a large community about accessibility in React applications, and there are many packages you can install to make it more accessible. Now let's go over some tips that can help you achieve the most accessible React application possible. Let's start with semantic HTML. I assume you all know about semantic HTML because you love good code quality and you want to have and give a nice developer experience, right? Right? Okay. Well, semantic HTML is not limited to the good old way of writing code. You can also use it in React applications. Of course, it will not look like this one because we use components, but yeah, the most important thing is what is rendered in the DOM, and this should most likely look like this very simple application. And you can choose over 100 semantic HTML tags, and I assume most of us only use about 10 and only know about 20, but there are in fact more than 100 semantic HTML tags. And the good thing about it is that the interactive HTML elements like a button or a link or a dialog, they have implemented functionality. So you do not have to write functions like when you click, then there should appear a focus because this is already implemented natively. And with the semantic HTML, we can structure the whole page or the whole document very understandable for screen reader users, but also for us as developers. So who would not like to read this kind of code? Very clear. It's very clear that this is a header, and inside there we have the H1, and there's a navigation, and the navigation has links inside, and they are structured in a list. And the main content is structured in different sections, and every section starts with an H2. And in the end, there is the footer. It's very understandable for us developers and also for people using a screen reader. And to give you a better understanding of what I mean with rendered in the DOM, it's like when you always use only divs for the header, let's say, or also for a heading, then this would not be very understandable. In this case, we would know maybe because we had added a class which has the name of the specific tag, but who knows what it actually is. And this, when we click on this accessibility button, which then converts or renders the DOM tree into an accessibility tree, because this is the important part for screen reader users, the screen reader would only read a text. So there would not be information about it. The screen reader user would hear this text, and after this, okay, there are links inside. Give the developer some credit for this. He used links, but otherwise it's only text, so there's no semantic meaning with this, and it's very hard to understand what's going on the page. But if you use semantic HTML, as I said, you use the header, the heading number 1, you use the navigation and the list and the sections. The accessibility tree also renders these and has their own name for it. Like in this case, when we create a header, the accessibility tree renders it as a banner, and the screen reader user will also hear that now the screen reader user is inside a banner element. And for the H1, for example, that this is a heading. This is the most important heading of the whole page to understand what's going on this page. And this is with all the other elements as well, the navigation and the list elements. And when you see here, it's the ignored things. These are all the divs and the spans which are only used for styling purposes. So the accessibility tree actually only renders what is important for the screen reader users and which contains text or meaning. And to give you a bit better understanding of a screen reader user, they use shortcuts. Otherwise, they would have to, like when I use a web, I can jump up and down and scroll up and down to see what's going on this web page. Am I even interested in this page? Otherwise, I would leave. But the screen reader user can only follow the DOM, like from above to the bottom. So it would be very burdensome if to go, first of all, through all the navigations. Maybe this is a mega menu and there were many links inside to listen if they're even interested in the site. So they can use shortcuts. And these shortcuts are only available if we use semantic HTML, because when we use landmarks like the header or the navigation or the main, then this is contained as a shortcut for the screen reader user to navigate only by landmarks or only by headings. Headings is the most important ones, so it's when maybe you know the web aim villain reports, where they collect all these errors, the most common accessibility errors, and also do research on the screen reader users, what they are using most likely, and this is that they are navigating with headings. And if this is structured, they can go through the list and can immediately see if they are interested in it. If you use not semantic HTML, then at least using Safari and VoiceOver, you still get the images, but the other things are not even there. So they cannot navigate through anything and would have to listen to all on the page. When we talk about the built-in functionality, we most likely have to use ARIA to make it screen reader accessible. ARIA is for us developers to create accessible components which are not existing in semantic HTML. And of course, you can also create a button with this using a div, which I see often, unfortunately. But if you would create an accessible button using the div, you would have to add the role button. You have to, the class name. You have to use a tab index so it becomes focusable. You have to create a mouse click event. You have to create a keyboard event. You have to, because you can interact with a button using the enter or the space key. Then you have the on focus. So it receives focus also visually, and the on blur that the focus is lost. And when you use the button, you need none of these. So who would actually write the first one? Just saying, stick to the button element. It's nice, it's clean. What happens in the DOM tree and in the accessibility tree? Of course, if you use the role button, then it becomes a button in the accessibility tree, but only the role of button, which is added with the ARIA, does not make it interactive. So you have to write all these functions which I showed you, even though it is rendered as a button, even if it's rendered with the role of button, and the accessibility tree says it's a button. The next problem is that some of the developers are breaking HTML because of lack of understanding how the parent and child relationship is working. And this creates invalid HTML. Let's say we have a list, we want to create the list, and we have the unordered list as the main component, and we want to add the list items as another component. And of course, we need the wrapper, and most of the people or most of the developers are using a div for the wrapper. But this would break the semantics because it also renders the div, and this is not a natural behavior. So the first child of an unordered list is always a list element itself. When using a library, an automatic testing tool, like for example the XDev tools, it also tells you the error that an unordered list or an ordered list must only directly contain list elements, scripts, or templates. And for the list element itself, it's also an error that list elements must be contained by either an unordered list or an ordered list element. And to avoid this, we can use React fragments. There are two ways to use fragments. Either you use the fragment word itself. When you use it, then you can see that the output, it does not have the div anymore because the fragment has no semantic value or anything. And this would be now accessible and also valid in semantic terms as well, because now the list element is the direct child of an unordered list. And I think the main purpose of using fragment or the empty tags is that you could, in some cases, for example, the example on React Dev documentation itself, have when you have a blog and many blog posts, that you could add the key to the fragment, which you could not, you cannot add anything when it's the empty tags, but you could add attributes if you use the fragments. And some small errors also occur when when people do not know about some smaller differences, like that in React we do not use class but class name. We do not use the for but HTML for when we use labels and input fields to connect these both. The tab index has the uppercase in I, or autocomplete, for example. Most likely these things that they're joined together, checked, default checked. These are some errors which also appear from time to time just to check if you use the correct React implementation of these attributes, that they are different, do not have any errors. Now I want to go over an example when it comes to focus management. And I think that, a CRUD application, if you're a self-developer, you're most likely created a CRUD application for your projects or to learn how to use React. I did at least. And I think it's a good example to learn about focus management and what you have to think about, and that it's not that easy to understand or to come up with a good user experience, even if it's a very simple application like this one. Let's go over it a bit. We would have the main title of the page, it's accessible to-do list. Okay, then we have, it could be a heading. It also seems like a label because it tells the user what to do, add a new task. This would mean for the input field. Then we have a button to add the new task. We have 3 buttons below. This could be, or I know it is, in this case, this is to filter all the tasks. Let's show me all the tasks, show me the active ones, or show me the completed ones. We have another heading, which is telling us that 4 tasks are remaining. And then we have these 4 tasks. 2 of them are checked. We have an edit and a delete button to each of these tasks. And when we go over these elements, and you are thinking only for keyboard users, how would you like the app to be interoperable? Let's say I'm now in the input field with my tab key, and now I want to add the element. And I hit inside the input field, I could hit enter already. And now the new element appears in the task list. Where would the focus go in this moment? Do you think it should stay in the input field because maybe the user wants to add another task? Or should it jump to the element which is created? Also, when you add the element, go with the tab key to the add button and hit enter now. Where should the focus go now? Should it stay at the add button? Should it go back to the input field because you assume they want to add another task, or should it go to the task which was created? These are all concerns you should think about when creating a component, and to make sure that the focus is always visible and understandable. You don't want the focus to get lost, and now the user is maybe down here and they think, okay, what I'm doing here because I want to add another task. And they would maybe have to go with Shift, Tab, go back all the way up and to be able to create another task. In this example, I want to show you when the focus on the input field, it's very simple. Input field is you write something in it, another element gets added, and hitting enter on the input field, how this could look like and how the focus stays. Yeah, so in this case, another element was added by hitting the add button, and the focus stayed. It was maybe it's not the best choice. I think you always should work with your users if this is what they prefer. But I think it was at least visually clear that the focus is still on the add button, and most likely the focus is lost because people start to set the outline to 0. This is all default behavior, so I did not have to add anything to the buttons or to anything because the button already comes with an outline. Maybe not a beautiful one. You can change it and style it as you wish, but please add an outline to make it visually clear where the user is. The next part, it's the list. I think it's the more complicated one. And in the beginning, this is when nothing was added and the natural behavior, and to show you how focus gets lost. And focus gets lost here when we go over. We start with the eat, have focus on the checkbox. It's also a default checkbox, so nothing was added. This is the default behavior, which has focus automatically. Then jumping to the edit button. And this is the first time the focus gets lost, because when the component appears where you can edit the task, the focus is nowhere to be seen. So the keyboard user would not know, where am I? Hitting the tab key, then it appears, but when you close it, then the focus is lost again. And in the end, the same happens when the user deletes the element, that the focus gets lost. For the delete button, I think it's very interesting to think about, when we delete something, where do you assume the focus goes? So I mean, there's no element anymore. It cannot stay on the element. Where should it go? Should it go back to the input? Should it go to maybe the heading? What I see often, and what I also would suggest, is that we make the heading after the first delete focusable with tab index -1, and that after the delete button, it jumps to the heading. Why would it not be a good idea to, maybe when you delete the first element, it jumps to the next one? What is when there is no element left in the list? And we can also interact a bit more with the heading, because what also changes was that now only 3 tasks were remaining, and before it was 4 tasks. This can also help with the focus, not only visually, but also make it for the screen reader users to be announced that now only 3 tasks are remaining in the list. Otherwise, this information would get lost for people who are blind. So how I would assume to work. Focus was immediately on the input field visually. Focus is back on the edit button. When we want to cancel, it was on cancel and back on the edit button. And I think it was for the keyboard user very clear where they are with the keyboard. And for the delete, it jumped to the heading. Other problems occurring with React applications are initially that page changes or notifications are not announced. But we do have some packages, and also we can use ARIA to make these things work. For the page change, there's something like document title. You also have, of course, to ensure that it's keyboard accessible when the page changes. We can use, again, the tab index -1 and make the focus appear for the first heading on the page. And then it would start from above. And use refs again. I did not mention that we have to use ref for this one. This is the important part. This is the React part of here. Use ref is the key to make the focus appear where we want to appear. Then there are also a few good tools like Reach Router, which has the accessibility what we are want here implemented. Also React Helmet, it's a bit outdated, but I think it still works. And React, in their official documentation, they are also working on a component called Title. It's still in testing phase, but I think what they want to achieve is that it's getting announced when the user changes the page. It seems promising, just saying. And for notifications are appearing somewhere on the page. It's already problematic for some people who are sighted, maybe with low vision or some other disabilities. So it's also important to put focus also on the notification, also visually. And here ARIA comes into play again. you can add ARIA roles like alert or status, which then puts focus automatically on the notification and also decide when it should be announced. This is a very important notification, then it should be at ARIA atomic true, so it will be announced immediately. Or when it's not that important, because the screen reader is always reading, so it will not interrupt the user while they are reading a paragraph, for example, then you can use ARIA live, polite, and then it will be announced after the user is finishing the sentence. And for this, you can also use Reach UI, React ARIA Live, and learn more about it in the regions in React. And lastly, I want to talk about testing for accessibility in React applications. It's always good to test very often, like maybe every component you're creating. Maybe that's too much, but I'm doing it when I create a component or when I have a page. I think it's still accessible, just to check if it's accessible. I use the tab key and go over all the elements I'm having on the page to check, are they reachable, are they visually, have focus on it, do I get trapped somewhere, can I interact with the widget without any problems. And I also use browser extensions. XDevTools, I think, is the most prominent one because it's by DQ and they have this whole library about all the knowledge on accessibility related stuff for all the elements, for all the areas. And I think it's the core for most every other tools as well, like if you use Playwright testing and Cypress and stuff. And with this, it's just a click away for you to see how accessible is your website. Clicking on create a report, and then you see how many issues you have and what are these issues, and you can learn about this specific issue, clicking on the element which will then appear here. It's also available using Chrome, Lighthouse extension, which also creates a report for you. Then, while you are coding, you can add linting stuff like the JS accessibility ESLint, or also from X by DQ, the XLinter, which immediately shows you inside the code that in this case, hey, you're missing an alt attribute for your image, please do this. And I think some companies are also adding it, that you cannot even push your code when it's not implemented. Yeah, and you can test everything like units and do special component testing, integration tests, end-to-end tests. Yeah, with the most common libraries, I would say Cypress and also Playwright. And what's also very good, I think, for component testing would be Storybook. If you use it in your project anyways, then good, but they also have an accessibility tab in here where you can check for values, but also to create forefront all the components if they're still accessible when they are on a page. Because one of the misconceptions is that your component is accessible and you're happy about it, but this does not mean that the page is still accessible when you combine different components on one side. And Storybook can help you show immediately if you can use a component in a specific order and if it would break your page or not. Yeah, to sum up everything, React can be an accessible library with the right knowledge and with the right implementation. And yes, with the stigma of React is not accessible is simply not true. It has, I think, some of the most or easy implementation ways to do so. And there's also a large community and advocates that are creating content on accessibility in React. It's very easy to consume and to add in your application. And yeah, the simple things, simple in my opinion, use semantic HTML whenever possible. Also use the correct HTML elements for its use case. Use fragments to avoid invalid HTML. Take care of focus management. Yeah, update the title on page change visually and also for screen reader users. And test your components regularly, automatically, and also manually. thank you for joining me today. And yeah, scan the QR code for Q&As or any feedback. Thanks.
Okay, question time. Any question here? Oh, come.
W3C. Does ring any bell? Okay.
Yes. Sure.
Just to make sure. Does that help somehow?
I mean, everything comes down to this, but it's very complicated. So, I mean, this whole organization is what it is about, to learn about accessibility, and also with the new law, which is coming next year, that the companies have to make their products accessible. And so the W3C created the WCAG. These are the Web Accessibility Guidelines, which you have to fulfill in order to be legally considered as an accessible product. These are very complicated guidelines, and the websites are very complicated, and I also do not look at it that often because they're so complicated. But I think what I showed you, for example, with the XDev tools, it's an easy way to start because they really show you in this component, and you have an error, like what is the error about, and you can learn in a very simple way and better understand what accessibility is about. So I would start from there. What the XDev tools, or also Chrome Lighthouse extension, has to offer to learn about accessibility. And then if you feel comfortable, which I still not am after 3 years, then you can look at the WCAG and read everything inside it. Yeah.
Other questions here? Okay.
Hi. You recommended rich router, which is supposed to support accessibility. What is the difference between rich router and React router in terms of accessibility support?
That's a good question, and unfortunately, I'm an accessibility specialist. I always work with developers. I cannot answer you any React-related stuff. So we worked with Rich Router, and it was way more accessible when they implemented it in this way. And they said they had not so many things to add than with React Router. But this would all what I have to say for this. Sorry.
Anyone else? I have some question here for you. You already answered this one, I think. Which dev tool do you suggest to check the accessibility?
Yes.
You already showed one. When you have a menu, how do you go back and forward between the main content and menu? So main content, menu.
The navigation. I mean, for screen reader users, they would navigate back with the shortcuts when you implement semantic HTML. They can always use the shortcuts, no matter where they are on the page. If they think, okay, the menu is too large, I want to go out of this menu, then simply click the shortcuts for the screen readers, and then they can jump to the main menu or to the footer or wherever they want to be on the page.
Thanks. The last one, I think. Which is the best practice to use the heading? H1, H2?
So yes, good question. There should always only be one H1 on a page, because this would be most likely the title. Most of the times the heading 1 is the same as the title which appears in the browsers. And then you maybe structure your site in different sections, even if you do not use sections as a tag, but yeah, like how would you on your own understand it? Never use a heading for styling reasons. Always use CSS to style the elements. But you have the H2, I would say, if you have a few of them on a page, because these would mean it's a title of this section on a page. And below this, then it would come the H3 and then the H4. So there is a hierarchy of how to use it and to not jump. So you cannot have an H2 and then the next element would be an H4. This is not semantically right. When you want to have an H4 because of styling reason, use CSS, but follow it's like H1, H2, H3, H2 again maybe, H3, and this hierarchy.
Okay, bring it up again for Julia.